everybody. It is Rob. It is time for another member talk, and we're excited about this one. We have an author of a brand new book that has just hit the market. This book is, I've read it. It didn't take long, and for me, that's great because I don't read. But it was exciting to read about this book and to see it. It's called Digital Remains. It's by H Harrington. And hi, Jay. How are we today?
Hey, Rob. Doing great. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm wonderful.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on, but also thank you for sending me this book. I've been sitting here trying to figure out certain things for a while of what happens to us after we die, and all these digital processes that we're so involved with. You answered them.
Good. That's a good thing to hear when you got a whole book about it. That's pretty nice. I'm glad you
So
enjoyed
give you a little backstory. I was sitting here at my office at the WSFDA office here last week, and I get an email, and it's from our landlord, and they said, "We've got this package that arrived for you." And I thought, well, that's weird because typically we don't get mail here. We get it at a P.O. box, but it's fine. So they came over, and I opened this package, and in it is this book, again, Digital Remains. And I'm thinking, what is this? And there you go. And right at the top, Death, Dying, and Remembrance in the Tech Generation. I thought, well, this is going to be cool because this is exactly what I was just talking with somebody about. What do we do when we die, and what happens to our digital footprint?
Yep.
And it just, poof, there it is right in front of me.
I mean, we're at the precipice of it kind of really taking off. We now have a lot of information online everywhere, from all the social media accounts, all of the email accounts. Some of us have YouTube accounts, podcasts, everything, and it's kind of building up slowly. So now it really is an archive of our lives that no generation has had before. The common person walking down the street has almost an entire life catalog online. And some of us may want to preserve that for as long as possible, while others don't want to see that make it any further than we do. So it's really a big part that we're going to have to, consider from now moving forward. I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Well, let's dive into it a little bit. I'd like to get a little bit of background and tell people about it. Before we do that, though, tell us about who you are. H Harrington, who you are. It talks about it in the book, but
sure.
Give us the highlights.
I'm the son of a funeral director and grandson of a funeral director. I grew up and lived in a funeral home that was about a 116-year-old establishment this year. Just outside of Kansas City, so right in the heart of the Midwest. It was a small town atmosphere, and with the small town atmosphere comes, if you're the funeral director, not only knowing everybody, but you have every other part of the job. You're a grief support system for almost everybody in town, and that's a big part of it. So 24 hours a day, it didn't matter if you were leaving the ice cream shop or the grocery store. If Dad had to stop, you were there. So I kind of hit on some of the childhood growing up in the book a little bit, just to really ping with. I think a lot of funeral directors really identify, even if they didn't grow up in a funeral home, the little aspects of having a family as part of this, because that's a big part of funeral directing, is the family that you have as well.
Yeah,
and, that's what got me started. I went into the funeral industry because of that. I graduated University of Kansas and then went to mortuary school. And Wiley Wright and Rick Sprick were my professors there, and they ran us through the ringer just like any mortuary school does. That's part of the fun. And then after that, I served as an economist and industry expert for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Oh, wow. And as part of my job duties was being an industry expert for the funeral industry and the medical industries. And I got to oversee a lot of the pricing and stuff for that from the government side of things. But then after that, I stepped back and thought, I need to get a book out, because that's the next step, is kind of building up ability for more people to share their knowledge base in this industry, because I think that's a very important aspect. But that's kind of how I got here. The slow and moving train, but it goes quick, and it's gonna be a good ride.
Well, it was interesting. You talked a little bit about that background history in the beginning of the book, kind of the introduction, and it was fun to hear. I didn't grow up in the funeral home, but I kind of did, in the fact that I started working at the age of 16 at a funeral home. And so some of the stories that you talk about, like making race cars out of the church trucks and that kind of stuff, I hate to say it, but it kind of hit home a little bit of, yeah, I've been there.
The out of service or decommissioned casket carts or beers, they really do, as a kid, get adapted,
Well, your funeral home kind of has a little bit of a history as well. I mean, chapter 1 of Digital Remains starts out with that question that I think we all get. Mm-hmm. Have you seen the show 6 Feet Under?
Oh, yeah.
You've got a connection to that show, though, a little bit. Your funeral home does.
Yeah,
and,
actually.
Share that with us.
So Dan Yount is the kind of the guy behind the intro monologue and kind of the scene shot that's kind of became the huge iconic part of 6 Feet Under the show. And the pictures that are in that entry monologue and the little desktop accessories that were showing were actually his grandmother's pictures that hadn't passed away yet. So while they were shooting everything, he kind of drew from his own collection of memorabilia to shoot some of the scenes, and the whole process of the body from death to grave is shot there. But the funeral home pictures were the same pictures that showed up a few years later at his grandmother's actual service in the same funeral home I worked. So I lived and worked, and that's it was kind of a full circle connection there, and he was kind enough to point that out to us, which I think I would have realized maybe after the service, perhaps, but he came up and said hello and signed a little copy of the intro scene, and that's still on display there, just as a good reminder. It's a small world, it really is, and we make more connections than I think a lot of people do here in this industry.
Yeah, they say that funeral directors are kind of, in a sense, almost like bartenders, in the fact that we see and hear all the stories that are out there, and the connections that we end up with over a span of sometimes just a year in the business or 30 years is tremendous.
Oh, and the confidence level that people have in this, I think, is right there with it. I think everybody in this industry that's good at what they do is as confidential as any counselor in the world. They get to help everybody, but I guarantee you have heard the stories of your town, just like everybody that's listening has heard the stories of theirs. And that's there's a lot of stories there, but not all of them are shareable, and that's kind of the burden and reward of this line of work,
Sure. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So, Jay, let's talk about this book, because it brings forth a number of questions.
Absolutely.
The biggest one being, today's society, we have Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got YouTube, we've got
Instagram,
whatever, TikTok, all these different things. But you pass away, you die.
Yep.
What happens to those accounts? I mean, where did this thought process come for you to be able to say, you know what, there's not much out there about this. Let's put a guide together of what we want to do with this and how we can close these accounts? Or you actually reference, how did you put it? I forget the term, but the designated person to close out these accounts for you.
Yep. I kind of coined the term digital remains steward, the person that you have to designate somebody to be in charge, or the likelihood of it happening really kind of goes down the drain. So I actually started the idea when I was sitting in an arrangement service, and before the final timeline had been set, you could just tell someone was on their phone about to do a post on Facebook, and I knew it would include the service times, and the clergy hadn't approved the times yet. It was still in the working process, but that made me wait a minute, just a second. Social media is really involved in what we're doing here, because it's one of the main ways in small towns now that some of the papers are gone.
Right.
Some people see the obituary section, and so that kind of blew up in my mind, and it was like, let's wait a minute, let's open up the dialogue here and show not only the families we're working with, but kind of mentalize it ourselves. How are we going to portray, hey, not only let's wait, here's the time and place to share that information, but say that family needs to now deactivate these accounts that are associated with the person that's having the services. Okay, how did they do that? Because every single site is different, and that's a big burden. If you have to go through all at once, that may be too much of an emotional burden. So I thought we really need a guide, something that says, hey, here's what I want as a person. And that may not be the exact way we can carry it out with every technology updating constantly. The services will change, but let's plan this out as easily as we can. And I can at least say, I do want these, or I don't want these sites. And I do want maybe my legacy contacts to stay there, because some people really do use a Facebook page as a means of connection for someone that has passed away. And that's a whole nother aspect that people don't think about until that they are going through it. I mean, if it's not really an important aspect of that person to the family, that's a pretty easy way to delete it. But if the person's friends are going to it daily to, still have that connection for the grieving process, that's another thing. So I think most people personally have an idea of, oh, my friends and family actually might need this for a couple of years, or I don't want them to have that as my memory. So that's really what the guide in the end of the book really has the goal of establishing a starting point to get that conversation going. And I made sure to have the designated steward so that person has been talked with about it, just like pre-planning a funeral. If we don't say these things before, it makes it a whole lot harder afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a big part of it, and I'm sure you have told many families that let's get this plan ahead of time.
Oh yeah,
pre-planning is more helpful than anything you could imagine.
Sure, it is. It absolutely. There was a statistic that really struck home with me in this book. And I want to talk about it just for a second, because I hear from folks periodically that say, I'm too old for social media. I don't do social media. Or my grandparents don't do social media. But there's a statistic in your book that really hits home to me, because it talks about the age group of 18 to 22 years of age. Now, I've got a set of twins that just graduated high school last spring.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. Actually, technically, they graduated just before spring. When they actually closed the schools, they basically said, you're done, due to the pandemic. But when I was reading that statistic, I thought, oh my gosh, this is their life. Now, the statistic says that historically, college students are 18 to 22, which means that the current class coming in would have been born around 2002.
Yep.
When you look at the invention of the iPhone or the smartphone, whatever you want to call it, and you look at the jump of numbers in social media, the statistic in there is very accurate and hits very much home of this group of kids, 18 to 22-year-olds, and I'm sorry I call them kids, but that's what I look at them as, because I've got two myself. They don't know a world without iPhones, social media, smartphones. They don't know a world that exists without that. And the crazy part about that is, because of them, I look at our lives and I say, now I'm the next generation above them or older than them. And because of that, we're having to be totally tied in, which means that the generation above us, my parents' age, same thing. And then my grandparents, which, are unfortunately that generation is quickly dying, but they're still to be in contact with those college age kids and younger. They have to be on social media.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
this is the
basically where we're at right now, we've encompassed 100 years of living just in the last 20 years of the invention of social media and smartphones. It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Oh yeah. When we add in the genealogy sites and everything on top of that, in the last few years, we have documented our essentially family line as much as we can.
Oh yeah.
By the minute, now we were documenting it by highlights. Now it's being updated by family trips to the ice cream shop or the family afternoon. It's
Sure.
documented by the minute, and that's a lot of information.
There is absolute ton of information just about one person out there, and you got to figure, what are we going to do with it? Mm-hmm. So this was a great read. It really was. It was a quick read, especially for me. Like I say, I don't read, so I was hoping the movie version would come out, but I figured I'm going camping this week and I'll read it. But it was a great read. It really was. And I also like that it goes into very different topics as well. It's not just about digital and social media, but you talk, there's some other questions that typically get asked of funeral directors. I love the one where you talked about, are we going to have enough space when people die?
Yep, I've heard that many times as a reason for picking one option over the other, or kind of pushing a decision one way or another. And so the next inquiring mind says, okay, let's do the math. Let's see if the most possible space was taken. How much room would it actually take? And a part that didn't make it in the book is how much space it would take to bury everyone that's ever been. So the current estimates are, there's about 8 billion people on Earth now, and one of the estimates that's out there is there's 150 billion that's ever existed anywhere on Earth. So if you combine those two, it's still, I won't share the exact numbers, but it doesn't take up the largest county in California. So it's if you buried everyone single depth, traditional American style burial with pathways and an airport to even fly in, it wouldn't take up the biggest county in California. So
isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I mean, it's it really puts things in perspective. If you really can go out into western Kansas and see a rolling field, and that would eat up a lot of the space needed. So it really isn't a space matter as much as people think, even though you do have a cemetery just about every town you go through. But that's a statistic that I thought needed an answer, because I heard the question at least a couple times, so that question, and there's a couple more in there that, we hear a lot. I'm curious to see if any of them stuck out to you, or if you had that question before?
Well, I get it all the time. It's mostly not a question as much as it is a statement. I don't want to be buried because we're running out of space. And let's generalize that and say, okay, different parts of the country, different parts of the world are absolutely running out of space. They're just not there. But you come out where we're at, out west, my goodness, there's space everywhere. But when you look at, that's what I liked about what you put in there, was you took what is the confines of a standard American grave, compared that to the amount of people estimated on the planet today. Basically, when you crunch all the numbers together, it came out with, and this is something that I've heard before, but it was interesting, it came out with the fact that you could bury the entire world's population today within the borders of New Jersey and still have a little bit of space left over. 100%. And when you think about it, it's crazy to think that many people could fit in the borders of something as small as New Jersey.
Yeah. Our constructs of space, when we kind of think of it in different terms, are really surprising. Yeah. And I even kind of took it a next level, and a different part of the book and said, okay, cities really are running out of space, and that's a different issue. So let's look at the new technologies that are being brought out for inner city cemeteries.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of creative and ideas that are being explored for just that idea, that concern.
Well, one that I read in there, which really stuck out to me, and I hadn't heard this one before. I know you talked a little bit. You addressed alkaline hydrolysis. You addressed what we're doing here in Washington, being the first state to offer natural organic reduction.
Yep.
You addressed those things. You addressed some other ones, but the one that kind of I took a step back and went, I've not heard this one before, was the hanging pods under the bridges of New York.
Yeah,
And using these pods or the energy created from the decomposition process in these pods to create light.
yeah. The GSAP Death Lab. It's the GSAPP lab, and that's the Death Lab at Columbia University in New York. Is an architecture school that is looking at new options for burial in cities, and they really are considering how to integrate them appropriately into lives that we can interact with, that mean and allow people to grieve the way they need to grieve. And it's people really are considering these options, maybe not as the way to implement, but how do we really put things in order to help the most people we can. And that's I couldn't be happier that people are doing these thought experiments now, while we have the time to kind of step back and say, hey, this can actually be a beautiful aspect that integrates in life, just like cemeteries in France were 100 years ago, and they were actually used as parks instead of just as a place to bury the dead. So I really enjoyed seeing other industries kind of looking at the question, and I think many people in our industry, in the funeral industry, have a lot of insight and advice that they could contribute to that and get it out there.
Well, I think, and you addressed this too, but I think we do need to be a little bit cautious in part of the social media downfall is we hear these ideas, we see an artist rendering of an idea, and the next thing you know, we've got half the world's population saying, oh my gosh, they're hanging these pods off bridges in New York City. They're not actually doing that yet. They're considering it. But there are some things that are in the book that are being done currently. The open air funeral pyres. Again, alkaline hydrolysis was listed in there. The idea of the flash freezing and vibration into the powder. I mean, these are things that are happening, and the American way of disposition is definitely changing. And we're seeing that tremendously right now in Washington where we're at.
Yeah. The ability to bring in new options, I think is also, it's a point that's not made, that the existing options are perfectly fine. If that's the option that strikes best with you, that's the option you should have. If these new options are in addition to existing options, and that's kind of a point that gets rolled over from time to time. Traditional burial will always be there if you need it. That's something that, if it's not said, it kind of sounds like the entire thing is changing, and it's just creating more access to more people in a way that's meaningful is the big takeaway I'm seeing from all these new options that are coming online. And that's a really valuable thing to the consumers across the country. It's a part of the options that if we don't offer, they're not available. Or if someone comes in with a new option and they're pre-planning, there's enough time to set those things up. That's a big part of it, is those new options that most funeral homes can cater to, as long as they have a little bit of prep time, I think that's the biggest thing.
It's great to really be open-minded to that. You did talk briefly too, I will say, about donation, which is a big kind of misunderstood. People that say I'm donating to science. sometimes end up in medical laboratories and are studied for, doctors to learn certain things.
Yeah.
But more often than not, we're finding now that donation to medical science doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up at the medical school.
Yeah.
So you really need to plan this out before you make these decisions. And that's what I liked about the book. The whole underlying premise of your book is plan, 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 pre-plan,
Yes.
pre-plan, pre-plan. No matter what you want to do, make sure you've got it ready to
That
go.
couldn't be.
So that's great. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we need to be informing the people that we serve. Pre-planning is not necessarily pre-purchasing as much as it is, this is what I want to do and how I want to do it and how do I get it done. That's the idea behind the pre-plan.
Oh yeah, I think one of the main lessons in the book is even what is right for you may not be right for another person, and that's okay. That's just because someone finds better option for them, that doesn't mean the next guy has to be wrong picking a different option. So it's getting your opinions and wishes out in advance when action steps can be made is one of the big points in the book that I hope comes across. I really do, and I'm glad it came across. That's a highlight.
Well, another point that kind of stuck out to me, I'll tell you, is with the regards to cremated remains. Washington State, we're 80% cremation. That's just a fact. I mean, we are basically the second highest cremation rate in the nation right now. I think we're just barely behind Colorado, which is maybe a 0.1 or 0.2% higher than us. But we're going to be there. We're going to keep growing, and we're going to see a lot of other forms of disposition. But one of the biggest things that has came out is people taking cremated remains and saying, well, I'm going to use these for material and planting. I want to, and I think that's a big thing that needs to be addressed is, what happens, you use the idea of the tree. We're going to plant a tree in honor of mom. We're going to put her cremated remains below it.
Yep.
What are you prepared for if next year that tree dies and you're reliving mom's death over and over again? Or do those cremated remains actually benefit the growth of the tree? You kind of took a scientific approach to that a little bit and put that into your book. And I don't want to spill all the details of the book. I want people to get it and read it because it's interesting, but it's an interesting take on what actually happens with cremated remains in the soil.
Yeah, taking those next step questions, I think a valuable resource for anyone working in the industry to have kind of in their back pocket. And if you're searching new options, I think those are also good things to think about because they're questions you just never realized would be a thing. You never realized if there would be connections to a tree if you associate it with somebody, and what that might mean for not only you but everyone in the family. Because it's not a one person grieving scenario in any of these cases. So it's kind of getting a gauge of how the people you leave behind will be able to really interact and find a real meaningful form of remembrance in this new and changing world. Yeah. That's a big part of it.
Well, this was a good read, like you said. It really was. And I was surprised when it came because as I started reading it, we're talking about, it's so brand new. This book is so brand new that I'm reading it and I'm going, oh my gosh, he's talking about stuff that happened just less than 90 days ago.
Absolutely.
And, this isn't stuff that happened 5, 6, 10 years ago. It's 90 days or less. So it is literally a brand new book that's out on the market.
And the planning guide in the back, you'll be able to find that. And there's a copy for the person filling it out and another copy to remove and give to the steward that you're kind of putting in charge. And that's a big part that I think is a valuable aspect of the book that people should offer. If it's a resource, I highly encourage passing it along if it's helpful to the reader or their family. I hope that gets at least used a couple times because I know it would help me and my family. So that's That's the first step.
Well, the planning guide, let's talk about it, because there's planning guides all over the place. Everybody has a planning guide,
Yep.
and they all kind of have the same thing, the vital statistics, the bank account, the where's your insurance. This is a planning guide, though, that says, I got a Facebook account, I got a Twitter account, I got a TikTok account, I got all these different accounts. What do I want done with them? And that's your digital steward.
Yep. And it's kind of a planning guide that was designed to not replace those other guides, because I know all those other guides exist in duplicate forms in most funeral homes. Mm-hmm. It's a guide to go in addition to. It doesn't ask all of the personal information that most guides do. It's just asking about the digital aspects, and it even has you planning for what you want done with your holographic rights in the future. Maybe an option that doesn't exist as we think of it yet, but knowing how quick technology goes, that's something that's on the books, and there are laws that already exist about it. So it makes it kind of a complicated issue, but you can start by just kind of handling and requesting what to do right off the bat with social media.
Touch base on that a little bit for me, that holographic, because I wasn't going to bring it up again. I wanted to kind of leave some of the surprises, but my goodness, I was down in Las Vegas 10 years ago, and we went to it was the Mob Museum of Las Vegas. It was really cool, but they had all these holograms from some of the different movies that have been out that we know as pretty popular, or some of the characters, and they had them holographed into this tour that you were on. Yep. And it was like you were talking to them. So the technology is there to do this process. Talk a little bit about it.
Well, I won't spoil it too much, but it's definitely a topic that is actually integrated in today's world already, if you don't realize it or not. And there are commercial viabilities to that have implications. So I kind of go through not only if you want or don't want this, what you want, and maybe a few background questions as to what you should think about before you make that decision. But I also go into, these are examples of how this has gone in the current modern world, and how they kind of did it legally, which is a big changing subject right now. How we're using all this online data that is talked about in the book and you're planning for in the guide really do have implications. I mean, when you say something that you put on Facebook or go online lasts forever is longer than you're on this earth, and what that means for not only you but your grandkids. And as a 12-year-old, that's a big decision to make, what your grandkids are going to see online. So that's a real world thing we're going to have to start thinking about.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's scary. It's fun. It's exciting, but it's very complicated. And how do we deal with that?
And I hope I portrayed that in a way that was relatable and easy to process, while kind of being enjoyable in the reading of a book.
Yeah. Well, so talk about it. This is a book right here. You can see the picture. Digital Remains. Where do we get it? Where do we find it?
It's easiest way, Amazon. Amazon sells books every second of the day, and you can do it by searching Digital Remains and then H Harrington, and that's the easiest way to find the book. It's available where books are sold, but in this Corona world, I understand that ordering is just the way of the world right now, and that's okay. It almost exemplifies and supports the reason for having the book.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
Well, and coincidentally enough, it's also on a digital format too, right? You can download it.
Offered on Kindle or downloadable versions just as easily, and have it the second you want it. I've had many people take that up and have actually gone back and bought the book because they wanted the guide in their hands so they could pass it out to someone they knew needed it. So yeah. I'm hearing those stories so far.
It's an interesting book. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. We're actually going to add it to our library here at the WSFDA office. And if somebody wants to read it or borrow it from us, it is available. But I would rather you go on to Amazon and download it or buy a copy. I was fortunate enough to get the author's signature in my copy. So,
Yeah.
so we've got a very valuable one here. But
Don't let them disappear, you know. But
yes.
other facilities will have just as good a copy if they put it on their shelf as well. I know that for a fact.
Well, it's even, the great thing about this that I want to point out too, it's not just for funeral directors to be able to share those ideas. It's actually written in a format and that a funeral home could buy, multiple copies and give them to families as a gift to say, part of our aftercare program is closing these accounts down or changing these accounts. And here's a great way to do it.
Absolutely. I designed the book and wrote it with the intention that it's not for just the funeral director or just for the audience. I didn't take a completely pure pro funeral home or pro anti funeral home kind of outlook on things. I wanted to make it most identifiable for the families you're helping. And that's the biggest thing, is using it as a resource. And I really do think it achieved that. That was the goal, and I'm glad you feel the same way, Rob.
Well, any final thoughts on it that you want to share with us that we can talk about?
The final thoughts, there's what we talked about and a whole lot more. If you've ever wondered about plain pine box as your option, or if you really wanted to know about the intricacies of other new options coming online, or you want your families to have kind of a realistic view of what, as a funeral director, if you want them to see the things you're seeing that maybe you don't offer, but you could provide if you really wanted to. One of the biggest hurdles we have as funeral directors is we can do almost everything if a family requests it, but we may not offer it on the price list or on the visual display in the showroom. So I think it's a resource that you could use for pre-planning or for grief care afterwards. It really is a beneficial set of questions and ideas most people don't think about until they want to.
Yeah.
So.
Well, digital remains, death, dying, remembrance in the tech generation. H Harrington. It's been fun to get to know you a little bit on here. I do want to, like I say, we're going to add some of these to our library so we can share them as well. But it's great to have you on here and to talk about something that is so brand new. Like I say, we're talking stuff 90. You're talking about the COVID pandemic in the book, and there's not much out there yet. So this is brand new stuff.
It is, and I'm glad to have be talking to someone that's been a voice in the area about it, especially on up-to-date things. COVID was a big swing, and that's it's been great being able to talk to someone that really does have an intention to help as many people as they can.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Well, that's it. We made it through another member talk. We're so excited you came on here, and I hope that people will hear this or see this video, and they'll run out to Amazon or they'll run out to their local bookstore if they can get in it. I hope they mask up if they do. And find the book Digital Remains, H Harrington. Here's one more look at it. And great book, worth the read, worth the couple dollars that it costs to get it. I don't even know what it costs to get it because, like I say, I got mine for free. But it definitely worth looking at. So, Jay, thank you. Thanks for coming on and being a part of this with us.
I appreciate the time, Rob. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.